why I think that a Enforcer's Blade needs a buff in Deep Oaken. So, generally it's known that heavies are obviously not the greatest weapons in the game. They can still function, sure, but light and medium specifically outclass them very well. But then, when you're looking at the viable endgame heavies, there are quite a lot to choose from, actually. You can go First Light if you really like to. You can go Darksteel Greatsword. You can go Petrus Anchor. You can go Pale Morning if you prefer that with no end lag. And then, if you're an axe person, you can go for Enforcer's Axe or Evan Spear, even though I do believe that Evan Spear is a little bit worse than Enforcer's Axe, contrary to what Agamatsu said. But then, when you're actually looking at it, there's a specific greatsword with 80 requirement for heavy and 25 strength. That's really not that good. So the power of greatswords usually comes from the fact that they swing really fast for a heavy, that is. But not deal. They usually have a 0.1 end lag, or a little bit more. But then, when you're looking at Enforcer's Blade gets no end lag. Cool. That's the only greatsword with that property outside of First Light. But then, when you're comparing it to something like Darksteel Greatsword, for example, let's say that you have a Darksteel Greatsword with max heavy, and then you have someone else with Enforcer's Blade and max heavy. The thing about it is that even though Enforcer's Blade gets a tiny bit more damage, 0.7 at the end, it still suffers from the fact that it swings at 0.54 swing speed. This is the slowest any heavy can go, and is, again, the slowest greatsword, because, every other greatsword is above 0.6. And normally this would be fine if the weapon itself was given some kind of, upside to make it better. But then you're actually looking at it, and you notice, wow, there is no reason to use this over Darksteel. Sure, you're getting 0.7 more damage, but then, you also get the 15% chip. Isn't that great? Sure. 15% chip damage, by the way, with max damage in Forcer's Blade. That's like 6 damage per hitting someone's block with a heavy. True Sarah Spear, with its just normal chip, that's a medium weapon, ends up doing more damage that way. Uh, and then, people can go, oh, well, it has no end lag. Okay, so? End lag really is not as bad of a thing as non-heavy players will usually assume it to be. Uh, I see a lot of people who start using heavy, and then they'll go for something like First Light, cause oh my goodness, it's rare and it's a great sword with no end lag. It's End lag barely ever ends up mattering for you unless you're like a Crypt Blade or a Divine Greatsword. The end lag is not noticeable, and sometimes it can actually be an upside for you, solely because of the fact that you're practically getting your M1 spaced for you. And, a lot of the time you're not going to be hitting someone with, a lot of the time you're not going to end up hitting someone multiple times with a heavy in a row anyway. So then, it's just a little unnecessary to even, care that much about end lag. Basically, we're comparing a weapon with 0.7 more damage, but 0.06 less swing speed. And that actually ends up mattering a lot, because most heavies are already pretty easily reactable because of the fact that, they swing slow. Um, but with great swords, specifically, you can't really do mix-ups because the greatsword critical is downright horrid. Obviously, you can go and you can say, oh, well, greatsword gets the two greatsword talents. Those are pretty great. Not really. It kind of does, depend on your playstyle, and, when you're reading them on, when you're just reading them, oh, destructive recovery, you can break an enemy's posture with the parry of a greatsword, and oh, heavy hitter, your posture damage is doubled when attacking enemies with a greatsword. It doesn't end up being that good, because in the end, if you want destructive recovery or things like that to work properly for you, you're basically just gonna have to play really defensive. Because if you do get parried, then practically all of their posture is refreshed anyway. So it just kind of ends up negating itself in a way. Obviously, you could play really defensive, and that way you could have some kind of like, oh, I'll just parry the opponent until destructive recovery procs, and then I'll hit them. But even then, unless you're like for sure expecting it, you're usually not going to be able to get destructive recovery to activate and then also hit them right after. You kind of have to be prepared for that, and obviously if you're playing super defensive, then you will be. But still, and like okay, as I was saying earlier, because Enforcer's Blade is the only greatsword with this slow of a swing speed, it kind of ends up being like okay, so like okay, let's look at like gray hammers, right? Petra's Anchor. Petra's Anchor does the most damage out of any heavy if I'm reading the wiki correctly. I apologize to any Petra's mains if I get that wrong. But Petra's Anchor should theoretically be doing the most out of any heavy. And that is a great hammer with also 15% penetration and also 0.6 swing speed. And gray hammers, I say, are the best weapon type out of all of them. Solely due to the fact that you're getting blunt hits in. And blunt attacks are far, far better than slash attacks. If you did not know this, whenever you land a blunt hit, it actually ends up doing slightly more stun. And that ends up mattering a lot for things like fists, but also if you want to do extended, like, heavy combos. So, like, let's say, you know, I'm just fighting with my Enforcer's Blade. I do this, and then I do that, and then I do that. That's not going to work, obviously. But if you got Petras, you have a far higher chance of getting that in because they can parry, like, they'll end up parrying far later than they would normally. And then if they scuff a parry there, you're basically just getting a free combo. And, yeah, but then with the Enforcer type weapons, like with Enforcer's Axe does the most damage out of any axe weapon and the most damage out of any heavy aside from Crypt Blade. Crypt Blade can go to hell. That shit is blatantly overpowered and Crypt mains will defend it with like, oh well, it's rare. Fuck off, man. Um but yeah, then when you're like when you're comparing it to Enforcer's Axe for example, that's a max damage of what was that, like 52. And then you also have the block breaking critical, which is nice. I personally do not like playing axes, but yeah. Yeah, you get the block breaking critical on top of that. But then, like, you play Enforcer's Blade, you're sacrificing a shit ton of swing speed, and also, another thing is, Enforcer's Blade actually gets less range than a Darksteel Greatsword, which I find pretty funny. But, yeah, with that then, you're gonna be looking at just like, well, this kind of is just objectively verse. The only reason my Enforcer's Blade, right, does this much damage is because I have an Akira's Ring and I have a Dawnfist Ring, plus it's 2% damage. The base damage of an Enforcer's Blade without my damage stars would be 25, and right now I would be dealing 47.7. So, you know, unless you can get things like that for Enforcer's Blade, you know, you're really just looking at a pretty horrible weapon when you're comparing it to other things. And then, you know, obviously you could go, oh well, you know, why don't you just stop using it? I like the way that looks, man. Also, I very much do enjoy what's it called, like slower weapons. I just wish that there was kind of a better upside to it. On release in Forces Blade, it had 80% chip damage according to like basically everyone. And then they nerfed it from 80% to 15. And I just feel like that's a little sad. I feel like if they were to buff Enforcer's Blade, though I doubt that they will, I feel like what they should do for that is making it deal slightly more base damage, and then also giving it like, I don't know man, like 25% more chip. I'd even be happy with that. Like, in Fortress Blade, it's just an obviously outclassed heavy by basically everything. A lot of the time when you're, like, playing an arena, for example, or just looking at heavy players, you're pretty unlikely to fight an Enforcer's Blade, and even if you are, you're obviously gonna have seen more people using literally any other Greatsword that day. Like, I literally see more First Light users than Enforcer's Blade users. But yeah, I mean,
You're only saying that because you want your weapon to get buffed.
true. um, if we're talking about other heavies, I guess what they could also do is buff the damage of some spears specifically. I feel like nerfing Petra's just a tiny bit would be nice as well. And then obviously nerfing Crypt Blade's base damage, but I'm not gonna get into why Crypt Blade is horrible game design right now. Anyways, that's some relaxing nerd emoji rambling for anyone. So yeah, there's that.